and making sure that those folks don't eliminate the voices of trans people who could also be there and be talking about this work. And I think that unfortunately happens with, specifically I think with mental health providers who see themselves as allies doing this work sometimes forget that including the voices of trans mental health providers who are also doing this work. And so just making sure that the people who need to be at the tables are at the tables, and there's actually enough room for everybody. Someone can be at the table and it doesn't mean someone else doesn't have to be at the table. So, there's a lot to be thoughtful of and consider, and this conversation, I think, could go on for hours. It's dynamic and it's multifaceted, and there's a lot of perspectives that need to be considered and brought to the table that aren't, and that the predominant voices on the national and international circuit is not always very representational of the actuality of the day-to-day lives of folks. So thinking about that.
And so let me ask you, what is the one thing you want to get across to everybody at WPATH when you go?
Oh, God. I'm so intimidated about WPATH. I've never been. And
if you were not afraid, what would you say?
I spend a lot of time talking about gatekeepers compared to informed consent, and I think that I have a deep passion of understanding the horrific harm, both overt and covert harm, of a gatekeeper model, and the idea of moving to an informed consent model. The basis of the informed consent model is trusting people know who they are and what they need, and that it is not our jobs as medical providers, mental health providers, policymakers, educators, to engage in any belief system that trans people need to be protected from their own mistakes. And if you live in a world where you are not fearful or invalidating subconsciously somebody who is trans, then it's not going to be hard to actually use an informed consent model. So, I think that quite honestly, from a very honest place, I think that it will be probably a difficult space for me to be in, no different than it was for Aydin 2 years ago. That I experience in a lot of places in a lot of ways, even in my own community of professionals doing this work, I hear a lot of othering language for people who are very committed and very loving. And so to be in an international space where there's a lot of people who have a lot of feelings and ownership and righteousness about doing this work, and being othered in that space, I imagine, is going to be emotionally and psychologically difficult. So my biggest goal, quite honestly, is coming out of that space feeling not more harmed than educated. And I think there's a high potential for trans folks to feel harmed in those spaces. So.
And sometimes it's letting them know that right at the beginning of the conference, to say, this is what I'm nervous about, and I'd like to, remind us to hold that space that there are trans people in the room, even if they don't say that they're trans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And as a trans man, I'm standing tall for myself and for the people who, 100,000, 500,000 people who could not be in the room today.
Right, because, who can afford to fly to Amsterdam and pay the registration fees? It's not the majority of the trans community, and that's a problem. Even if you look at the conferences around the country, I think that there's been a lot of effort to increase access, but the reality is that as somebody who travels to all these conferences, it is a gigantic financial burden. And so we are perpetuating the idea of what Joe was just talking about, is that somehow this is believed to be a white phenomenon, or a middle class, upper middle class phenomenon. And the trickle-down theory has not worked in economics. It's not worked in any domain anywhere across the country and across the world. And so we need to stop applying the same philosophy and mentality to the trans community, that the trickle-down, like you and I and Aydin Keys and Xanders and a variety of other people who, I could spend hours naming, we work very, very hard to try to take what we learn and what we know from these experiences that we're part of, and taking it and bringing it into the communities that have a harder time accessing it. But the reality is that it's still at least one, if not two. You're at least one or two people removed You're still at least, and people are not getting that first-person experience. Their voices are not being heard. And as somebody who speaks and does this, every time I present, I'm witnessed. Every single time. So if I speak to 50 people are witnessing and validating my experience and my story and my perception or actual expertise. But there's trans kids all over the country who are not experiencing that level of witness and validation from home to school to community, let alone in large public settings where people are hearing their story and being moved by it. Most of these kids, their stories are not moving people. Their stories are causing discomfort for people. And the sort of psychic and emotional trauma that is a result of that is catastrophic. And we want to sort of treat that psychic and emotional trauma with Zoloft. And we don't understand why that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Joe's talking about, I don't know, something a little while ago, and I have clients who socially transition so early that they have no memory of their assigned sex at all. And that's really fantastic. They were so supportive, but there's actually, you know, mental health implications around that when you're 13, 14, 15 years old and you have no memory of your assigned sex. It's really difficult to integrate any sort of relationship or pride or instill any sort of ownership around being trans. So we talk about celebrations, but it's really actually quite difficult when families and communities organize around the idea of quote-unquote normal being intrinsically connected to cisgender.
Right.
So, you know, we have to understand the dynamic nature of what it means to support trans and gender nonconforming youth. Is it celebrated early access to everything, but celebrated is also not making trans a bad word. And to understand that if, you know, we need to, like, examine our language, like people who have trans experiences, well, turns out cisgender people are also having experiences. And so we need to create equality around the language around things, just like we did with transgender and cisgender. That from within the community members ourselves, we're still talking about things in a way that is othering, and I have no desire to assimilate into cisgender world or straight world. I don't want that at all. You know, I'm a queer trans man, and I really love that. And I don't want my experiences as a queer trans man to be relegated to experiences while cis straight people have lives.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Queer identified trans man.
Right.
That's who I am.
Who's perceivably straight, right? And it's like when
because I have a wife and 2 kids.
They're like, oh, I'm a white straight couple, and I'm like, oh my God, you're just so offended.
And how easy it was for them to reproduce, and you know, it's so easy. One looks like her, one looks like him. Well, my daughter looks like her because she couldn't look like me. She couldn't be a redhead and look like, you know, and be from my genes.
Right.
You know. Yeah. Well, I love you guys, and I'm so glad we finally got to have this chat on, you know, especially, you know, given what happened in Orlando this morning and knowing it, here we are in Pride Month, people are swarming because they're having a good time, and somebody's severe mental health, you know, destroys thousands of connections to all those people who are so deeply affected by what happened at that club, and headed off to Amsterdam, and I'm coming back from D.C. from this summit, and to be in this intersectional place, it's perfect. So
I just want to sort of mention something quick about what happened in Orlando. That I saw a friend of mine on Facebook who is a gay man who made this post that I thought was really fantastic. That there's this horrific act that it happens, right? And it's a direct attack, or it seemingly at this point, we don't have enough information, but it seemingly is a direct attack on the transgender, nonconforming, and queer community. And now they're having these mass, like, we need blood, because there's so many injuries, people donate. But you know whose blood they won't take? The community that was just murdered, right? And so we have to think about, like this is this post of this man's like, I'll go donate as much blood as I can. Oh, right, you won't take my blood, right? And so we're thinking about that's not nothing. No, that's not nothing, and that is going to sit with people as much as, you know, and always has, but it's going to continue to sit with people of like, you've attacked my community, I want to help my community, and you won't let me.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway.
No, well said.
Thank you for giving us this space and time and platform. I very much appreciate it.
Well, and having a personal relationship, it completely changes the dynamic, and no stupid questions that can be asked.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
I think it's so important to have those interviews.
I agree, and I think that giving parents, one of the things that I see a lot of parents lose hope and dreams and wishes when their kids come out as transgender and non-conforming, and I think that you and me and the other people who are trans who are participating in these dialogues, if nothing else, one of the things that we can do, we can lend our voice to parents, remembering that they can still have hopes and dreams and wishes and love the crap out of their kids and mess them up in all of the ways they were going to mess them up even if their kid wasn't trans. That I see so many parents are like, all of a sudden their life becomes, all about grief because their kid is trans. And it's like, God, as children, we need adults and people to have hope for us. And and I think that empowering parents to not forget to have hope and dreams and expectations just as they did before they knew this amazing information about their kid.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And when they see your beautiful wedding picture, and happy anniversary.
Thank you.
To you both. It's just, love and stunning, It's so, as you both are.
She is by far the best thing that has ever happened to me, so I feel very blessed and lucky to be part of her.
Where did you two meet?
We met at the Trans Health Summit in San Francisco in 2012, I believe. And because it happens every 2 years, I think it was 2012, and I apparently was sitting against the wall with my head in my hands. And, for people who know me, I have tattoos all over my arms, but at the time, all that was really visible was the words transcend and evolution is what you could see, and Joe saw me, and somehow something about me resonated with her. And at that time, in my world, Joe was like Dr. Olson. She was like
Dr. Olson,
guru, right? Yeah, right. And I was like, oh my God. And I, if I was more of an outgoing extrovert, I probably would have asked for her autograph, but I'm not. So I sat quietly and observed from afar. And then, I was lucky enough for the nonprofit I was working for at the time up in Chico, California, started providing me financial assistance to start going to some of these conferences. And by sheer luck and circumstance, I was invited to kind of hang out with Joe and Susan Landon and Kim. And for me, my experience was like, oh, my God, I'm hanging out with school kids. Right? How'd this happen? And
I felt the same way when I was hanging out with them.
I was like,
we all went
God.
for ice cream down below at the convention center in Seattle.
Right. And I was like, if anyone knows that I'm hanging out with if they realize that I'm not one of the cool kids, I'm not going to be able to hang out. I felt like I was in junior high again. It was horrible. It was great and horrible all at the same time. And then the connection between Joe and I just, grew and grew, and a friendship developed, and we were each in our respective relationships at the time, and then those relationships came to an end naturally, and it just allowed for our relationship to move into a deeper connection. And I think that once we both realized that, it became an unstoppable force, and our lives individually created pathways for that to happen. So
that's awesome. Did you give her phone number first, or did you give her yours?
Oh my God, I'm the super shy guy, right? So I remember she had sent me a text or something. She's gonna have a different version of this, of course, but I remember her sending me a text message, and I was driving, and I thought, oh my God, why is Dr. Olson texting me? And I froze. I panicked. I had no idea what to say, what not to say. I could not make any sense whatsoever while she was texting me. But even at the conferences, when I would show up, I was convinced that she wouldn't know who I was. And every conference, I was surprised that she knew who I was. Like, I could not actually make sense of that in my brain. And so